Good morning, everybody. Welcome on in. So I got a good one for you today. It's little financial advice, okay? If you would like to ask me a question, you can ask me about anything. It can be financial advice, can be fitness or diet advice. Uh, Go ahead, write to me at askbullmuscle@gmail.com, where, as far as I'm aware, I am the only financially independent nuclear engineer runway model on the planet. So definitely would be worth hitting me up if you've got questions, you want to learn something. Today, we are going to talk about the 50-30-20 budget. Okay. So, what is the 50-30-20 budget? 50-30-20 budget is it's a, I wouldn't call it a marketing campaign disguised as a budget, but it sort of is one. The idea here is that the 50-30-20 budget, you break into three distinct and simple categories. 50-30-20 budget gives you your needs, your wants, and your savings, right? So I'm not a fan of this budget. It is, I'm going to go ahead and say my nice things about it up front, and then I'm going to get into why I kind of think it's bullshit. At least, or people misapply what it should do. So the idea behind 50-30-20 is pretty simple. I mean, people as far like on a lot of sides of the political spectrum use it. I know Elizabeth Warren uses it on the left. There are people, even guys like Dave Ramsey on the right, who would probably give you something fairly similar to it, were you to ask them immediately. Here's why I'm not a huge fan of it. Again, I'll talk about what's good about it. What's good about it is that it's very simple, and there is elegance and simplicity, right? A simple budget. I mean, you could have a fourth grade education and figure out what that means. Half your money goes to your necessary expenses, right? And most people are good enough, they're intelligent enough to figure out what is and is not a necessary expense, right? 30 for wants. That's the one that really rankles with me, and we'll get into that. But the other nice thing about 50-30-20 is that it will ensure that on a long enough timeline, you should never go bankrupt, provided you continue to have a source of income for a long enough timeline. We'll get into that because that's one of the negative issues, but it will keep you financially afloat. And it's certainly better than having no budget, right? So if I was going to do a tier, or a Wheaton scale of how to budget properly, right? The lowest level is going to be people who are financially insolvent. That means they're spending more money than they take in and maybe even taking on debt to do that. That's bad, obviously. Then one level above that, you got people living paycheck to paycheck, or they are spending 100% on needs slash wants and saving zero. Obviously, that's a very fragile budget, is what I would call it. It's sustainable insofar as if you can keep your job and have no black swan expenses, but life gives you those, of course. So is it really sustainable? No, not really. Beyond that is the 50-30-20. So let's get into the bad side of the 50-30-20. The first one I would talk about, and I actually have some notes here, so let me pull them up. I, I want to call it, for those who are actually serious about their finances, baby's first budget. Um, because really what it allows you to do is get, especially as your income goes up over time, it allows you to throw a really quite outrageous amount of spending into wants, and it becomes quite wasteful at some point, right? Spending 30% of your income on discretionary items, even if you make a fairly average salary of $50,000 a year, that's over $1,000 a month. Let's say $50,000 a year post tax, okay? Just for the aid of simplicity. 30% of that is $15,000. That is that's actually $1,250 per month on wants. Now, I'm sorry, but who needs to spend that much money on wants, right? Now, it can take different forms, right? A want can be taking one of your need items like a car and upgrading it and having a nicer car. I don't recommend doing that, but it can. Uh, that one, that one, it just doesn't make much sense to me. You know, right? Especially living out here, right? This is another problem I have with the 50-30-20, right? Living out here once, as long as you have the right ones, are free, right? Between hiking and the beach, like I would say 90% of my activities and cycling, I guess, but cycling to me is almost more just how I get around. Uh, but as far as wants are concerned, right? Between hiking and the beach, my cost of wants are virtually nil, right? A new pair of boots every couple of years. And even then, I buy mine secondhand. So a used pair of boots every couple of years is $15. Maybe a pair of socks or two over the course of. Actually, shit, I've had those socks for 6 years of wool socks and they're still freaking good. So I guess not there, right? Uh, and I get it. Not everybody's cup of tea is the great outdoors. But if you live in a state, really in the western third of the United States, so Colorado, New Mexico, Wyoming, Montana, and westward, if you live in any of those states, your wants cost should be very low based on the fact that you've got some incredible things around you. Now, with those Western states, you also have higher costs of your needs. In general, for instance, housing is higher in those states, with a few exceptions, mostly like New Mexico, right? Or rural Nevada. But if you don't like the outdoors, if you don't like hiking, why do you live in the higher costs of living areas? And this is the one that kind of bothers me more than anything else is that the 50-30-20 budget does not allow for optimization, or it disincentivizes it because it says, well, I'm saving 20%, good enough. What if you get pay raises in the future? What if things get better? Well, the 50-30-20 basically allows you to ignore ever optimizing things, right? And you should learn to optimize things, especially if you're on the road to financial independence or you want to get on the road to financial independence. The way to do that is to constantly look for improvements that you can make to your spending. Uh, by just saying, "Oh yeah, you can put 30%, you can put 1.5 times, right, what you save towards what you want. At bare minimum, you could easily and more or less instantly improve this by swapping it to 50-20-30. That would be very easy to do. Now, if you've got a family, the same really applies. And the reason being is that if you have a family, first off, you should not be having children until you can afford them. Okay. Don't have children you can't afford. Apart from inherited wealth, that's about one of the biggest mistakes people in society continually make. But if you've got a family, the whole point of having a family is to spend time with your children. If you don't want to spend time with your children and commit to doing that for 20 years, reconsider having children. Okay. So, this idea that, 20% savings rate, let's do the math on this. Okay. I'm not going to pull out the equation because I know most of y'all aren't interested, but doing the math on this, if you have a 20% savings rate to get financially independent, in other words, to get to the point where your money will last you for the rest of your life without having to continue working, you would need to have a 37-year career. Okay. Actually, I will write that out because it is worth saying. This is assuming an average return on the S&P 500 of roughly 7% and a withdrawal rate of roughly 4%, which is pretty much standard, right? Because that's going to give you a 37-year career, assuming you start, your career at, let's say, age 20 to 22. That means you're going to be able to retire right around 59 to 60. Okay, congratulations. You beat the US average, which you would with a 50-30-20, because the average American savings rate is 5%, which is fucking abysmal. But 37-year career means if you're the family man, no, you're not spending a ton of time with your kids because you're stuck at the office all of their childhoods. If you want to raise a family, you need to invert this at minimum. Go 50% savings. If you can go 50% savings, I know that's high, but all of a sudden this goes down to 17 years. 17 years, you go from being retired at 60 to retired at 40. If you're retired at 40, you're going to be able to spend time with your children, which is the whole fucking point, isn't it? So that's pretty profound. That's a pretty big jump. I would recommend, I think most everyone above a middle class salary, which if you're trying to have a family, again, probably want to have at least, maybe making 50 grand a year. Yeah, you should be hunting for a 50% savings rate. Now, let's talk about a couple other problems with this. So I'm actually going to write out the problems so that way you guys can see them. All right. So we're going to go ahead and write downsides 30. We're going to go 35-year career on the basis that, right, while once you retire, you're only living on 80% of your income, but you've probably gotten addicted to the hedonic treadmill because if you've kept this 50-30-20 proportion over your career, most people's salaries rise, which means your ability to cut your spending falls basically because you've blown up what this needs budget is. You've gotten a nicer car and a nicer house and nicer shit you probably didn't need but thought you did. Same with the wants, right? You become entitled to it. So that's a 35-year career. It disincentivizes optimization. We've already talked about that. Okay. Ah, there we go. Come on, camera. There we go. Right? There's two other really, really big items that this doesn't work for. It is not location oriented. Now, what do I mean by that? Right? When I mean location oriented, it's areas. I'm going to give again Hawaii as an example, but California or any other high cost of living state with loads of natural beauty could apply here. Your wants should be substantially lower, but your needs is going to be higher because, well, you're probably going to have to pay more for housing, right? And yes, housing is a need. I'm not going to be that guy and say, well, you could go van life. I get that that's not practical for 99% of people. Oh, I'm going to hike Tripler Ridge this morning. It's going to be great. But it's not location oriented, right? Or New York City, for instance. If you live in New York City, a disproportionate amount of your income is probably going to go to housing. However, in a place like New York City, there's a lot of relatively low cost, free, fun shit to do. Again, same with Hawaii, same with California or Colorado, right? This 30% towards wants should be a lot lower. Maybe the 50%, maybe it's 60% towards needs, 5% towards wants, and then 35% towards savings if you're, looking for something like that. However, again, New York City, right? And this is the other issue that it doesn't work very well for high cost of living areas, does not scale with income well. Okay. So we talked about the $50,000 salary. Well, let's talk about, let's say you're, a hotshot Wall Street guy. You're young, you're in your 20s, but you're already bringing in over $100,000 a year, or honestly, these days, $200,000 a year. Or you're a tech guy in San Francisco, right? Or you're in some high income field for a moment. Let's take you're a top 10% earner, right? Well, because it doesn't scale with income well, that's going to tell you that as a, let's say you're a hotshot young guy in your 20s, you're going to be spending $50,000 a year just on your needs. That's not really necessary. Even here in Honolulu, I spend maybe $20,000 on my needs, right? In San Francisco, maybe it'd be $30,000, or in New York, it'd be $30,000. You don't need to be spending, or sorry, $30,000 a year on needs. You don't need to be spending that 50%. Whereas if you're if you get to those super high income places, eventually you get to what Sam Dogan, the financial samurai and champion of Fat Fire. I've covered Fat Fire in another video. I'll try and link to it in the description. You'll get to the point where their budget is just ridiculous, right? Like they spend $400 a month on clothes. And yeah, they've got kids, they've got growing kids, but that's what secondhand stores are for. Yeah, you're not too good to shop at Goodwill. Buying a bunch of new clothes that your children grow out of every 6 months is fucking stupid. It's that's not a good use of your money. Uh, or they said, they spend tens of $1,000s a year to send them to private schools. And they live in one of the nicest areas of San Francisco where the public schools are very good. It, no, that's dumb, right? And classifying those as needs first off is another conversation to be had for another video. But the point is, it's you get to the point, right, when you start making two, three, or $400,000 a year. If you apply this budget, you're spending more than most people make entirely on wants, and you're gonna get to the point where you're putting needs in needs, if you know what I mean. You're putting things you don't really need in the needs budget because you're trying to find a way to continue justifying spending 50% of your money on it. If you're if you're spending north of $100,000 on needs as a single person, you need to re-examine your budget. If you're spending north of, honestly, as a family, either I'd say north of $100,000 as a family on needs, and north of $50,000 a year as a single person on needs. If you're doing that, you need to re-examine what is a really a need, right? Now, I make compromises here. My budget, for instance, is, I think, something along the lines of maybe 20% needs, 5% wants, 75% savings. Now, the difference is, as a result of this, my working career is effectively over. I could quit whenever I want. So that's the definition of financial independence. And look, if you're down with working a multi-decade career, then yeah, go ahead. Have a savings rate of 20%. But again, this is gonna make it a lot harder for you. You have fat to cut, but because you get content at this budget level, you're never gonna do it. So if if the 50/30/20 seems too easy for you, that's because it is, and you should consider increasing your savings rate to 30 or 40 or more. You should absolutely consider doing that because it's going to cut your working career. Now, it's not to say you have to retire when you hit that financial independence number, but it gives you fuck you money. Okay. And yes, this is getting demonetized, but I don't run ads anyway, so I don't give a shit. It's fuck you money, right? The whole purpose of fuck you money is if your boss pisses you off, you can tell him to blow you and you can leave, right? If there's a recession, you're not scared because you're well insulated, right? If there are layoffs, you don't have to worry about it. And if you like your job, you can keep working it until you don't. And then once you don't have to stay. It's freedom. It gives you agency in your life. A lot of people, I think, claim to want freedom and agency, but they don't really because they become a slave to ennui, or they decide they wouldn't they wouldn't know what to do with themselves, which to me is shocking. You must be a very boring person if if you didn't have to work for money and you couldn't come up with something you would want to do to fill up your time, I I don't think we can relate very well. I'll put it that way. My bucket list is long and ever growing, and I think I would run out of things to do. Now, the reason I haven't decided to take the jump yet is because I've made a few business investments that have diminished my liquid capital a bit. I could still do it, but I'd like a little bit more in reserves. Honestly, most people in the financial independence space call this one more year syndrome, and I'm absolutely suffering from it. But I mean, I did in my to my defense, I did attempt to leave with the DRP, the buyouts Elon Musk championed for the federal government, and then I got rejected because I'm a nuclear worker. Real fucking cool there, Mr. Hegseth. Real fucking cool. Anyway, but in very high cost of living areas, right, where your needs are going to be your needs budget will probably be a little bit higher, but your wants budget should be lower. It also doesn't scale very well to extraordinarily low cost of living areas. When I lived in rural South Carolina, more than half my budget, or sorry, more than half my spending was wants because my needs costs were so low. Does that mean I should have increased my needs costs? No. I was perfectly content, right? There would have been no reason to do that. But because my housing costs were super low, what would the point have been, right? Like my car costs, I had a paid off car that was very good on fuel, that was reliable. Why would I want to spend more on that? Doesn't make any sense. So, right, this budget, this is the problem with overly simple things. It's right, it's garbage in, garbage out. And I'm not calling this budget garbage. It's overly simplified. I would call it baby's first budget. Like you're the first serious budget you're making. Um, but if you can't, right, it just doesn't scale very well with income. It's not very good for very high or very low costs of living areas. So it's not location oriented. Uh, it disincentivizes optimization. And if you have a 20% savings rate, you're in for a career of 35 years, potentially longer if you want to be a little more conservative with your withdrawal rate or if the market doesn't perform as well, et cetera, et cetera. So it's not I'm not a huge fan, honestly. And what bothers me too is people will it's not even so much the budget's fault itself, but it's people's irresponsible usage of the budget to where they will use the 50-30-20 to come up with what living comfortably means. And this is where you get those ridiculous figures that say, "Oh, well, if you live in the state of Colorado, you need a $160,000 salary to be living comfortably." Fuck off. No, you don't. Absolutely not. Like, no. There's I like visual capitalists. They come up with stuff all the pretty good stuff all the time, but it's you have to look at their underlying assumptions. Their underlying assumptions is using that budget. But as a result, what all that is going to do is make 99% of people feel miserable because, well, not 99, but like 95% of people feel miserable because most people don't make those amounts of money. And it's gonna incentivize people to do dumb shit politically because they think, oh, we're being screwed by the evil corporations or by the government or someone because the average salary isn't $150,000 a year or some other ridiculous number, right? We already have in this country some of the highest standards of living in the world. We are extraordinarily spending oriented, right? The average, again, I'll say it one more time. The average American savings rate is 5%. That is dismal. The fact that the 50-30-20 is something people aspire to as financially responsible is a shocking telling point for just how bad Americans are with their money. And we are, okay? Go and look at the average savings rates for different countries. The Chinese are north of 25%. The Indians are close to 40%. And reminder, India has an average income of what, $4,000 a year? Now, I'm not suggesting we all live like the average Indian. There are reasons we shouldn't, but there is something to suggest that, maybe we could cut back on the spending a little bit. And again, I'm not saying my budget is the optimum for everyone. It could be, but what I would recommend is obviously get a budget. Unless you are already financially independent, at which point this entire video is not really of your concern. But once you've created your budget, start optimizing. Figure out what's comfortable and go a little bit beyond that. You want to push your limits of comfort a little bit because that's how you stimulate personal growth. Then analyze and figure out where you want to go from there. For some people, 50-30-20 may seem like a draconian cutback. I would suggest those people start there. Again, you're in baby's first budget stage. But for some people, they'll have already passed that by. And my suggestion to you is that if you get a windfall or an increase in income, don't upwardly increase your needs and wants. Keep them where they are. You were fine before. Take all that money and put it into savings and then buy your freedom because it's priceless. And here's why, right? Yesterday, I was at Makua Beach, that's out past Waianae on the Farrington Highway. And, there was food. It was for a birthday party. There was food, there was drinks and all that, but we didn't end up eating a ton or drinking a ton of it. I think everybody brought way too much of it. The most fun we all were having, at least what I spent most of my time doing, was hurtling myself into the shore breaks and going ass over tea kettle into the water because that shit's fun. And then playing volleyball, walking on the beach, talking to others, having human interaction and connections. And right, apart from a volleyball net, which is a relatively small one-time expense that, you can have 12 people play, or spike ball, or whatever else you like to play. Or again, hurtling yourself into the waves, which is literally $0.00. That all costs nothing. And I'm aware that not everybody has incredible beaches to go to. However, most of you also have much lower housing costs than I do, right? Or what I pay for, right? I live in effectively is something similar to a boarding house. I have a room. I don't even have an apartment, right? But the point here is that what really makes you happy, and that's what made me happy yesterday, what really makes you happy is spending time with people you like, and better still, if you love them, human interaction and connection. And then that's really the biggest thing. I mean, for me, being in good outdoor areas is essential. That's a big part of the reason why I was interested in moving here. But you don't have to move to Hawaii to get that. You probably shouldn't, actually. All you got to do is develop a friends network. And that's going to require work. It's going to require going out and finding quality people, people who have similar interests, and people who view life maybe not the same, but there's enough common ground to work with. Humans are the most interesting creatures to other humans, right? So, if you live on the mainland, let's say you live in a place without a lot of natural beauty, or maybe you live in a car dependent shithole suburb. First off, moving is always an option, and you should consider it frequently if you're looking to optimize. Second off, even if you don't want to do that, find connections, spend time with people you love. And maybe if they're super spendy, suggest an alternative that maybe it's a little bit lower budget, right? If all your friends are going out for, triple digit budget busting brunches, maybe suggest picnic, right? Where you can cook and bring something, or suggest, again, a day at the beach, a hike, whatever. Speaking of hiking, I'm going to go hike Kaho'omoe Ihikapulani again today. My body is battered from playing in the waves, and it should be a good time. I'm very excited. I'm going to spend 6 odd hours hiking, and then I'm going to a music festival, which is free for me because I'm a labor union member. music festival with pretty much all I can eat food uh, at the Waikiki Shell later. So if any of y'all live in Oahu and you want to meet up with me, uh, probably not going to be able to catch up with me on Tripler, but go and the Waikiki Shell. I'm going to be there this afternoon. That's all I have for y'all. It's just not that hard, right? Really, all this comes down to is the 50-30-20. You can do a lot better, and I think most people know that. So that's all I got for y'all today. I will be probably mostly hanging out in the Discord. Might be another YouTube short or two that drops this week. Uh, this weekend is Labor Day weekend. Labor Day is my favorite holiday. I should do a video on that. Um, but yeah, it's gonna be. I'm having a blast here. It's been a good weekend, and that's partially why I haven't been making as many videos. It's just been too much fun shit to do in real life. This is why I need to just pull the plug and fucking quit already. But soon, soon. Anyway, that's all I got for y'all. As always, make good decisions. As good decisions form your actions. As actions form your habits. As habits form your values. As values form an ethos to be the guide star through the rough wonder. Can't even talk today. The rough waters of life, y'all. Much love. Come in for the hug. Play me out.